Welcome to the great conversation where ideas matter, ideas shape markets, ideas can change the world. Today, we're with a fascinating man with an interesting experience, and more importantly, having a dynamic impact on people's lives. I have Rick Morris, the CEO, owner of R Squared. That's a
R
consulting
Squared.
a consulting company that makes dreams come true. Tell me what you mean by that line, Rick.
So essentially what I do for a living is help people understand what their dream is, how you can get there, and what it's going to cost to go along the way. It's project management. But if you've ever asked what a project manager does for a living, it's the most boring conversation you can have in the world. And the end of the day, there was a great lie that was told to me when I was young. They told me I own the project, and every project manager's heard that. It's like, really? I own it? It's mine? But it's not your money, wasn't your idea. The people don't report to you. So what do you own, right? At the end of the day, you own the blame for when it goes wrong. And so I wanted a better way to state what it is that we do. And really, there's not a piece of software, a piece of technology, a car, a building, anything that doesn't get to its full fruition without somebody like me behind it.
However, I've dealt with many project managers in my life. There's some secret sauce that you bring to this. Even if we publish this community on an audio cast, which many of you will be listening to this, I'm looking at Rick right now, and a John Maxwell team logo is on his sweatshirt.
That's right.
There's something different about your project management, your program management, that looks different than most program managers I run into. What is it? What is it, Rick?
Yeah, there's a juxtaposition between leadership and charts and graphs, really. I don't like the term project manager as much because you manage things, you lead people, and the greatest asset in any company is their people. And so why I feel like I've made a difference in my career over a lot of the project managers out there, because we're known as command and control. We're charts and graphs, follow up, all those different things, Gantt charts and reports, and how long is that going to take? And I'm holding you to it, and baseline estimates. But all of that is the tools to influence. And I think a lot of project managers don't know that influence game. At the end of the day, it's not my dream. That's one thing I have to remember. It's your dream. And so you're the one that decides when is too long, how much is it going to cost, all of those things. My job is to influence your decisions, to understand what your hot buttons are. So if something if cost is your number one factor and you just ask us to change something, it's not a change request, the command and control, sign the change. It's really getting you to understand the impact of that decision on cost, which is influence, not charts and graphs. The charts and graphs support me, but it's really influence. And it really gets into truly servant leadership. And I don't know if you've heard the term agile, but the big thing in project management and agile coming out, agile is a new methodology. And they say agile leaders are servant leaders and project managers are command and control. And that's just not true. Anytime you go through training, as a matter of fact, if you go through agile training, when they describe what project management is, it very much sounds like I'm Godzilla wrecking a city. It's just awful. And then agile is communal living and butterflies and hugs at the end of everything. But really what agile is pushing is people over process. That's one of their mandates. And project management's a very process-centric thing. It's a very process-centric type of methodology. And I think the biggest awareness for me when I went through agile training was the language. And that becomes a parallel to answer your question of why I think I might have some secret sauce. My language is about seeking success. It's about getting to our dream. It's about getting to where we want to go. And I think all the language that I was trained in project management was about avoiding failure, risk diagrams, mitigations, budgets and contingency plans, and all that is saying something's going to go wrong. As a matter of fact, there's something called the iron triangle in project management. They say that's time, that's cost, or that's scope, or the completeness of the product. And they always say pick two because one's going to slide. I was actually trained to say that. So basically, we're going to stink in one of these three areas. Which one of those areas do you want to stink in? That's how you start the conversation, right? Now, those three things are in constant conflict, but they're all opportunities as well. And so when you start to get into seeking success language, it's more about, we can do that, but maybe we do that post project, or we can do that, right? It's versus, this is a change request, and it's a scope change, right? Most of the executives, they shut down when they hear scope change. They don't even know what it means. They just know it's a shutdown period. But that's really the answer. To me, Agile started talking about servant leadership, and to a lot of people that's new, but I feel like servant leadership has gotten me to where I am today.
So interesting as you talked about the iron triangle. It exists in another time and space, because that other time and space is how the CEO has taken its greatest asset, its people, and got them to think about their company with purpose and passion. And
Yeah.
so here you come into an environment, really interesting. I'm going to ask you about the dichotomy of this, where you're going to help them really leverage the people in this process around time, scope, and cost as opportunity instead of conflicts, with success language that they've never heard before. But what happens when that CEO hasn't done their job and hasn't made that process they're going through their dream?
That's a great question. And that's the first thing that we have to settle on, is what is it that we're doing here? One of my favorite things that I've heard through leadership training is fall in love with the journey, not the plan. And that hit me so square in the face in project management, is that what we do is we say, we want to put this product to market, right? That's the dream. And then the first thing happens is a project manager operationalize that to a date and to a cost. And then the entire focus of the project is about that date and that cost and what we interpret it as to the dream to mean. And we completely lose sight of the journey. It all becomes about the plan. So it's really opening the eyes up. Like, I love hard dates when people are like, it's got to be done by March 30th. And I always go, so who dies if we don't? And I say that on purpose, because they go, what do you mean? I was like, I mean, literally, is it a first to market strategy? What is it that is it a regulatory date? Is there a fine? Is there something? Why is that date so important? Because that date that you're picking right now is going to impact the lives of your people, which are your assets. So is it that important, or somewhere in that range? And I'm just trying to find out. That conversation alone is an influential one that probably 90 to 95% of project managers will not have. When they get that date, they go, okay. And then they'll turn around to the team and they'll go, we got to be done by March 30th. When do you think you can have it done? And the team goes, I guess March 30th. And we're like, great, let's go. And that's it. And then, of course, when you go past March 30th, everybody's just toiled and worked for so long to be called a failure. And when that happens over and over and over again, coming back to the iron triangle, I always say, when somebody says, well, it's iron triangle, I say, well, let me tell you how the iron triangle, I can meet all the criteria, but still have a cruddy project. First of all, I made everybody work nights and weekends. I hit the cost so that hits time, right? Nights and weekends. I hit the cost because they're salary employees and I didn't pay them another dime, and say I delivered the project. But now you're turning over 40% of your staff because you made them work nights and weekends for something that wasn't even relevant. But you know what? That iron triangle, I met all three sides. That people has got to be the center of that triangle. And every decision needs to be made with people in mind in order to really get a thriving, real company going.
So, what do you usually discover when you ask? Here's the way I interpret your question. What bad thing happens if we don't meet the date? What bad thing happens if we don't meet the cost? So you're asking that question. You had a different version of it, but you're asking that question. And what do you find most of the time? Do you find 90% of the time it's not as bad as everyone is talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say out of all of the mandated dates that are out there, probably 2 to 3% are truly mandated.
My gosh.
The rest of them, here's how a date becomes a mandate in most companies. The executive says, I sure would like to have that done by the first quarter. Somebody in middle management says, I am going to make that happen and be responsible for it. Then it becomes mandated down the line. all kinds of churn and decisions get made, poor judgment just to hit that date. That if we came back to the CEO and said, is second quarter cool? They'd have been like, yeah. Perfect example. I was running a project for an insurance company. I had a contractual date of March 31st. Everybody was freaking out about March 31st. When I wrote my first plan, I landed around April 15th. Not too bad. It was pretty close. But everybody's like, oh, you can't present that date to the CIO. And I was like, but I'm going to. So went to the CIO. And what I do is I say, here's your date that you gave me. And I appreciate that. And so it's recognized on my plan. Here's where the plan is falling. And he was like, that's cool. I said, so what was the deal about March 31st? He goes, end of a quarter. And I said, so are you okay with April 15th? He was like, yeah. The interesting thing about that, though, is the next day he called me and he goes, I was thinking that I was going to need a quarter's worth of data to kind of toss out to kind of stabilize. So if you do go past March 31st, just find a way to capture the time so we can put it in the system and we're good. But it only happened because I asked him about the date. So now I've ingrained that. So the first question is, why that date? Why not this date? Why not this date? Mm-hmm. And 90% of the time, they don't know, Ron. They don't know. It just sounded good. Mm-hmm. And now when you start to go through that process, we may discover something of why that date's really super important. Maybe there was a customer commitment. Maybe, right? There's reasons for that, but it's not the end all be all.
Well, you're also doing one other thing, because if you do discover the date is critical, and yet by talking to your team that you're probably not going to make that date, you basically are describing failure at the very beginning of the process.
That's right. That's true.
So now you have the opportunity to plan for failure as well as for success.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, real world story on that. We had a regulatory date, so we were going to get fined $1 million if we didn't finish this project. And when I went to the CIO, I said, I want to get the team together and do a work breakdown structure. He told me no. He said no. And I was like, but I kind of need it. And he was like, figure it out. So I had to go door to door to my team to put together a plan. But when I did, we were supposed to be done June 30th was the regulatory date. My date fell into October. So I started to play with the plan, and I realized if I could get a server on the raised floor by February 14th, we could hit the project. So I went back to the CIO and I said, can you circumvent the processes for me to get the server on the raised floor? We finished early, but there was 3 projects. The other 2 missed. So the question came back is, how was my project the only one that was successful? Well, I was the only one that still planned the project, even though the date was hard. If that makes sense. Even though June 30th was a deadline, people said, we don't have time to plan. We have to get started. You'll hear that so much in project management. But because I took the time to plan, I already knew it was going to fail and was able to put a stopgap in there to avoid $1 million fine. And it cost us nothing to do that. Zero to do that. And we ended up transforming the whole server ordering process of the organization, which sped up technology for years to come because I took the time to map the process out.
Okay, I want to get into that head. I want to get into that head, Rick. What is going on in that person's head where they deceive themselves that they don't have time to plan?
Because they feel that the time that they're going to take doing that takes the time away from the work. Mm-hmm. But what they don't know, and it's true. And it's true. I just had a development team. I had to stop to give me a day of planning so I could really tell them what it was going to cost. They don't want to do it because they feel like if they lose that one day, that basically they're going to be behind in the project. And what I'm trying to discover is I think we're already way behind and we really need a level set, but I can't do that without the proper data. So, but that's the thought mentality is we got to get going. We can't sit down and write a project schedule and agree to things. And granted, some of those processes can take long. You can accelerate those, but there's nothing better than getting a team in a room for 4 hours with a bunch of sticky notes and a board and planning it out so that we at least understand what the level of effort is. There's no reason and no use case in my mind that doesn't improve the operation of the project versus deter from it.
Who usually brings you in?
Normally I get brought in by executives, to run things. And normally in my usual space, I'm the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th project manager that's been assigned. And I'm in a rescue operation. I'm in one currently.
And how do you already have a demoralized team when you walk in, I would imagine.
Without a doubt. This one's interesting, because for the first time in my career, there's two separate projects going on, but it's using the same development company and it's the same customer. But they switched out the development team twice, and they've switched the project managers out two or three times. And so you've got tons of just uncertainty and everything else, and asking me questions like, do I understand the difference between the original scope and amended scope, when they can't describe it to me? Um, but I had an interesting interaction with that client today, though, because you've got two different styles of project management going on, but everything else is the same developer, same client. And it's the first time I've really gotten to see a kind of a juxtaposition between true servant leadership versus command and control. The other person's command and control, his templates, his things. You got to estimate this way, and they're churning. And I'm very much, how do you want to estimate? And I'll be the translator, right? I want people to work in their natural environment. My job is to make that all blend. But when I was talking with the customer today, he said, I've never seen a project manager in my life who seemingly does so little that gets so much accomplished. And I was like, describe that. Like, first of all, I'm working my tail off, buddy. Like, what do you mean? He goes, but the appearance is that you're just very easygoing. Everybody, there's no churn. Everybody gets to do things in their own format. And he goes, and I feel the momentum of this project, just tenfold since you've been on it. How is that? And the only answer I could really give is the difference between servant leadership, being a real servant leader, versus command and control and structure.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. People hear servant leadership, they ascribe a theology to it, they describe a softness to it, a kind of a sugar coating to it. But servant leadership is a weapon. You are using it as a sharp edged blade to get to something. Tell me what you're doing with servant leadership. That is so powerful.
I value each contributor as they are and as they think. I have another example where I ran a PMO. I always thought it was really dangerous to take your best project manager and put them in charge of the PMO. And the reason being is it's two different skill sets. It's like making a developer the manager of developers, right? And that's the halo effect, and that's happened all throughout companies forever. But for me, a project manager's job is to stay inside the lines, right? Color inside the lines. I wrote a blog post called The Fifth Grade Explanation of Project Management. But if you imagine a coloring book, right? The lines are established. The project manager gets to color inside the lines. The PMO manager has to establish what those lines are and what that structure is. And that's two totally different skill sets. So when I ran a PMO, it was very important to me that my project managers thought and operated the way they should think and operate within themselves. Some people are very graphic. Some people are very visual. Some people are task list people. And so the thing I couldn't do was mandate, here's the meeting agenda template. Here's the meeting notes template. Here's the template for the Gantt charts, because I'm diminishing the value that contributor brings to me, because I'm not allowing them to think the way they think naturally. So what I did is I said, these are the 5 concepts in which we're going to communicate, but how you communicate that concept is up to you. So meeting notes are going to go out after every meeting, but whether that's a Word document, whether that's a bulleted list, an email, it doesn't matter to me. Whatever works for this project, whatever the team wants, as long as meeting notes are being communicated. Same thing with issues and risks, right? If you want to keep that on a detailed log with reds and yellows and greens, and that's fine. Or if you just want to keep a list of things, I don't care, as long as it's being done. The interesting thing about that case study is we were actually compensated by hitting milestone dates and production dates. So when we put something into a baseline, we couldn't move it. And we were at 98%. And it was because we worked our tails off on risk mitigation and risk identification, those kinds of things. But 98% is unheard of. But I had a phenomenal team. When I left, they took that senior project manager underneath me and promoted her to the PMO manager. Vastly different approach, to the point of, let's take meetings. She had everybody record the meetings and then transcribe the notes so that every word uttered in the meeting went into the notes. So now you're expending hours upon hours of effort for no reward, no return. Like my meeting notes are like, hey, Ron and I were here. We talked about this stuff. Here's the key decision. Let's go, right? Like that's all we need to document. And they fell to 31%. the next year in milestone, because they were spending all their time on meeting notes and none of their time on risk identification and planning and working with their teams and understanding the progress. They were chained to their desk doing meeting notes. And so those case studies for me is where I say, you know what, if I allow you to blossom and to grow and to think, which is really what a servant leader does. And a servant leader, really, you ask the question, how can I serve you today? What can I do for you today that's going to advance your purpose? Versus, I need you to do this today, right?
When
That's the biggest difference.
and when does that, under what circumstances does that fail?
It fails when they don't have all the information they need to make the relevant decision, which is my job. But what we do is you still allow them to make the decision to find out where they are in their understanding, and that gives me the opportunity to understand what I need to coach them on. Where did the information fall through the cracks that they didn't know that this was important, or they didn't know that this was a process that you had to follow? And that becomes a coaching conversation, not it becomes growth at that point. And again, that's servant leadership. But if they don't have the awareness of everything to make the decision, then that I got to bring that to the
But
table.
there's a feedback loop going on there.
Absolutely.
You stated, a project manager needs the color inside the lines. The PMO gives them the lines and structure to do so. You want to give them the 5 concepts that they get to play in. I call that the sandbox. You're going to give them the sandbox. And then you're going to ask them, this is, I think, your secret sauce. You're going to ask them to articulate how they colored.
Not only that, but let's bring it back to coaching and what real coaching is.
Right.
Real coaching, and this was mind blowing for me because I was a very directive leader early in my career, and I was not nearly as successful. But the quote that always gets me about coaching is, if you give somebody the answer, you rob them of a lifetime of learning. If they find the answers within, they'll always remember it. So if I tell them what to do, I'm going to get that momentary satisfaction of that task complete. But I truly believe companies have demoralized their employees so much that they're afraid to take any decision outside the line. I had an experience where there was an issue. I got called in an emergency with a client, talked to the guy, gave him 7-step process. At step 2, something broke. So I had to go through step 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 again. At step 4, he got stuck, and I had to go through 5, 6, 7. So I did like 5 of these meetings, Ron. Now I'm in a grocery store, and my cell phone rings, and I pick it up, and he has another issue. And I was like, well, I'm at the grocery store, but I'll get to it as soon as I get back, right? During the drive, he sends an email to everybody, including the executives, that he's stuck and the consultant's not being responsive.
Oh, no.
And I was furious at that, right? But what I did is, as soon as I got home, I was like, I wonder. So I took his exact words, put it into Google, and the answer was right there. I was like, so basically, you've gotten so afraid to even Google something and try something that you weren't told specifically to do. That told me more about corporate culture there than that person. And I see that so much as we rob these incredible ideas and we rob the beautiful hearts of our assets. That our greatest asset is our people, but we then beat them down every time they make a mistake or tell them they can't take. And so that's where that adage of 5% of the people in the world think, 10% of the people think they think, and the other 85% would rather die than think, that it's not the person, it's the culture of the company that has forced them into this, well, I'm just not going to say anything.
What happened then to a woman who was reporting to you, as you said, and then got, as you left, she assumed your position, but she had gone through all that coaching. She had gone through the experience of, I'll call it the round table. That is, you're constantly in this dialectic mode. You're constantly in this inquisitive mode, trying to find out what they know, how they're applying it, and also their own creativity and approach. So she's already experienced this. What happened when she crossed over to take that role?
Well, first, the first is, I feel like I did a really good job not allowing her to see that I was coaching. So she didn't even know that it was happening, so that she wouldn't attribute it to that, right? The other thing is, a lot of people just have this theory that their way of success was the best. So if you think about it, by allowing her to do what she wanted, she actually transcribed meeting notes. That's what she did.
That's
And
right.
she attributed her
Wow.
success and the reason why she was a senior project manager on the way she approached things and didn't recognize the value of allowing people to thrive. So this made me successful, so it must make you successful. So the practices she brought, she was doing and being very successful, but she thought that way, and I allowed that.
Mm,
Right. So we would have really had a rub if I turned around and said, "You're not doing that."
right.
Right. And I would have lost her on the team at that point.
So, if you were going to advise the executives who bring you in at the end of the day, if they're going to replace you at some point, they have to learn to interview for emotional intelligence and servant leadership. Can these people actually be a coach? Right.
Right. Right. And that's and to be honest though, when I do get replaced is when they don't want to deal with somebody who does that.
Right.
Right? They feel that that approach itself is wrong, so they're going to go into the opposite, command and control probably, and probably experience even a worse failure
Right.
at that point.
That's correct. Well, this has been a great conversation with Rick Morris, uh, a guy who makes dreams come true. And I'm sure I'm going to be touching with Rick in our own individual journeys, learning more ways in which we can see things more clearly in a great conversation with our employees. Rick, thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly been a blessing, and I appreciate it.